talk to Ben Bradley now, Conservative MP for Mansfield, because I was quite shocked, Ben, a very good afternoon to you, to learn about this public money that's being spent on re-educating all of our MPs.
I do, mate. Yeah, it's a lot of money as well. I think we're into about $750,000 for the first course that we've all been told to do over the summer, and another potentially $750,000 on the way.
Right. And what is the course called, and what's it supposed to do?
So this one that they're planning now is called unconscious bias training. It's exactly as you just said, that we're all closet racists. We just don't know it. And we need to be re-educated about the language that we use, make sure we don't ever offend anybody, which obviously leads to really good scrutiny in Parliament, as you can imagine, if you're trying desperately not to offend.
Right. Well, I mean, Keir Starmer's just got up and given Boris Johnson a bit of a coating at a press conference. I presume that would be termed offensive, would it?
If he's being mean, Mike, then obviously we shouldn't be being mean, should we? He has committed to doing the training, though, hasn't he, Sir Keir?
Well, he's called Boris Johnson. He's called him incompetent. So I think that's quite mean, isn't it?
That's a bit of a judgment, really, that he shouldn't be making, should he? Without, considering all of the reasons why Boris might have, conditions that might make him particularly offended or emotional about that. Maybe he needs to think that through a little bit more.
I mean, there will be people listening to this, probably knowing more about it than I do, because they may have been approached by the company they work for to be told you're going to be having to do the same thing, because you're obviously in need of some unconscious bias training.
Well, it's been rolled out across the board. It's mad, to be honest, how this, in my view, overtly leftist kind of programming has been rolled out across the public sector. Lots of people in private sector organisations now, very keen to be seen to be doing things like this, the politically correct kind of appealing to the Twitter sphere, and it's been rolled out across the board. I'm very lucky that I can say no, but I'm conscious that lots of people in workplaces around the country aren't going to have the luxury of doing that. Right.
And how is it you can get away with not doing it then?
Well, I have been called into the Speaker's office. I'm going to get telling off later in the week, I think. Right. But ultimately, obviously, I'm answerable to my electorate, and the feedback I've had since the article appeared in the Mail this weekend has been really overwhelmingly positive from constituents who are fed up with being preached to or preached at by the kind of metropolitan types who don't really understand the culture of our part of the world in that perception.
Well, no, exactly right. Also, there's a kind of shamefulness now that's attached to being British. I mean, I saw, for example, Donald Trump last week talking about, reintroducing patriotism to classrooms and teaching people about the United States of America. And there was a lot of sneering that went on this side of the Atlantic because, we should never do anything like that, as if learning about our own heritage and our own country is somehow wrong.
It's mad, isn't it? I mean, Donald Trump has many faults, but actually, believing in your country and that patriotic belief in what we can achieve as a country is something that's replicated around, certainly around the many kind of red wall or blue wall constituencies that went Conservative in December because they were fed up with us being ashamed of our own history and apologising for it.
Right. And also this kind of militant arm of Black Lives Matter, which makes out that basically every black person in this country is somehow disadvantaged because of us being white, is a nonsense, because I know lots of black people in the media, lots of black people generally, friends of mine who'd say, it's actually insulting to make out that we somehow need a helping hand to get through life in the same way as white people, because it's not true.
It's been steadily happening for a while, hasn't it? You find a lot of women in the Conservative Party who find it really offensive, the idea that they should be on all women shortlists, and that's the only way they can possibly get elected. Right. Those kind of conversations have been happening for a while. But we know that the biggest indicator of people's life chances in this country is still social class. It's still the economic background that you come from, not your race or your gender. Right. And that's something, that isn't a protected characteristic. It's not something that we support people with. I've got a big campaign in Parliament about white working class boys who are, in terms of attainment and life opportunity, are bottom of the list, actually, and tend to get forgotten.
Well, there was another study, I think, that was published over the weekend in which that was proven to be the case, that the most sort of unmobile in terms of social class in Britain are white working class boys. And I've said this frequently about things like the BBC. I mean, they're spending £100 million on diversity at the BBC to try and make it more diverse. But the trouble with the BBC is it's full of people from the middle classes. There aren't any working class white kids in Broadcasting House. If you go looking for one, you'll be there a long time.
Quite, and we've got this obsession, haven't we, with diversity of physical characteristics rather than diversity of thought or opinion or background. Yeah. We've done it in government. We'll have the most diverse government ever, but everyone went to Eton and Oxbridge. It's not quite as representative of the country as you would really like, but it's all about being seen to do something rather than really doing anything effective, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, this company, one of the companies mentioned in your piece, Challenge Consultancy. I mean, this is obviously a license to print money, isn't it? Because you form yourself into one of these companies, go and visit the Ministry of Defence or something, and you've suddenly got thousands and thousands of people, albeit that they're all working from home, who you can charge a load of money to teach them how to be fair.
Absolutely. You know, it's a company. I'm thinking you're setting up myself, Mike. If you want to get involved, we could.
Well, maybe we could set up. Can we set up a company doing the opposite? I suppose we wouldn't get any. We wouldn't make any money doing it the other way.
Some kind of anti-woke training. I'm not sure it's it's up the right street at the minute. We've got some battles to fight before we get there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
But even
right.
within these departments, you know, we were talking the other day with some colleagues about. I think it's the Cabinet Office. We've got 66 diversity officers employed within the Cabinet Office.
Wow.
Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds on pushing the wrong agenda, in my view.
Right. Well, I mean, pushing an agenda which may not be necessarily wrong, but it's kind of unnecessary, it seems to me.
Yeah. Absolutely. You know, what is it we're trying to achieve? As we said before, is it diversity of physical characteristics, or is it diversity of thought and making sure that the institutions that work for the country are actually representative of the country?
Right.
I hope that they push to have some of these departments based out. You know, we're talking about York and we've been talking about Stoke and having civil servants plucked from those kind of areas instead of all being in London might perhaps make a difference to the mindset.
Yeah, right. Have you found any sort of support inside the Houses of Parliament in terms of other MPs who might have your view?
I've never been so popular, to be honest. I've had hundreds of constituents drop me emails the last few days, and lots of colleagues seek me out just to say kind of well done for raising it.
Right.
If you believe the papers, there's up to 40 Conservative colleagues who've said they're not going to take this training, which I think is exactly the right thing to do.
But I suppose you might make an argument that says, well, why not go and do the training and see what it's all about from the inside, to see what it is, what this message is actually all about, and what it is that they're doing.
Yeah, well, as you touched on at the beginning, there's 2 rounds of this training. So I've done the first one, which was valuing everybody. Right. 2 hours of very jolly conversation with very nice colleagues, but basically 2 hours of don't be mean to your staff, right. Which, you know, I think I'd probably worked out beforehand. Yeah. This $750,000 was kind of unnecessary. And if I was mean to my staff, I'm not entirely convinced that was going to change anything.
Right. Can you give us an example of one? Can you give us an example of one of the things they told you not to do?
It's kind of scenarios. So you go through, you know, video of a senior person in an office, obviously kind of leering over a female member of staff, and then you get the question: is this right or is this wrong?
Who knows? I don't know the answer to that.
Who's to say? I need education.
I mean, that's ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, it really is bonkers, and that's the trouble. That, you know, this is all unnecessary.
Absolutely. You know, it's common sense for the most part, and the idea that we've all got these hidden evils that we're unaware of. You know. We all have different backgrounds and experiences. We all learn from our own lives and experiences, as I say, and that does give us perhaps different ways of viewing the world, different thought processes about people and about how we judge things. But that's kind of normal, in my view. The idea that we should be imposing a certain mindset on everybody, I just think is mad.
It really is. I mean, it sounds to me like, I don't know if you've seen it, that Tracy Ullman video, which is very funny, where she's sort of doing a class of some kind or other, and all of these woke people keep picking her up on the vocabulary that she's using and how upset they are about something that she said and how offended they are. But it's actually a comedy sketch. You know, this sounds like, you know, the real thing.
Yeah, you know, we take the mick out of it, but it's happening. And, you know, I guess hopefully a more watered down version. But, you know, particularly, I think, as a representative of a part of the world that's felt like it hasn't had a voice, that's felt like it's been kind of sneered at over the last few years for voting leave and all the rest of it. The idea that I shouldn't have difficult conversations, that I shouldn't use words that might offend the kind of the establishment and you know, people at the BBC, I think just makes me unable to do my job. And that's probably the biggest reason why I don't think it's right.
Yeah. But do you think this is also on a more kind of wider, broader level, kind of seeping into every facet of our society, so that it's affecting, for example, the way the police operate? I mean, a lot of people were very critical of the police at the weekend and the way that they kind of stormed in to the Trafalgar Square march because it was full of people who didn't want to wear masks, as opposed to them storming in, or not, rather, when they see Black Lives Matter occupying Oxford Circus, and they just let them get away with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's seeped into so many facets of life, hasn't it? And I think there's this huge pressure on the police, but on all sorts of places, to kind of conform to it. It's a bit Orwellian in many ways. I keep using the example of the Premier League. Yeah. I don't believe for a second that every single Premier League player believes in the goals and objectives of Black Lives Matter, smash capitalism, defund the police. Yet every single player has taken the knee, because you can only imagine because of fear of the consequences of being the one player that doesn't do it.
Yeah, and that has alienated an awful lot of football fans. A lot of football fans say to me now on social media, we don't watch it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, sit down watching Match of the Day with my family, and there's a grumble every time they show that bit at the start of the clip. Right. Certainly not appealed to anybody. And we saw the incident, was it up north somewhere, Bolton or somewhere like that, where the chap flew the White Lives Matter flag and ended up with criminal
Burnley, yeah.
Investigation. So
right.
I think the hypocrisy and the approach to it is incredibly difficult, and I feel for the police in many ways because they're under this huge pressure. But it's certainly not healthy for a society that's going to genuinely kind of value everybody.
Yeah, and I'm not quite sure when it all happened and how it happened, really. I mean, I sort of blame partly, not just myself, obviously, but I blame all of us, really, for kind of not paying attention, perhaps, when it was beginning to start happening in universities, when, left-wing lecturers were basically banning talk of anything that they didn't like, not teaching actual history, but teaching the history that they thought they should teach, and we kind of allowed that to happen, and now look where we are.
Yeah, I think it's been happening for a long, long time. I was reading a book recently called The Long March by Mark Sidwell, which is about exactly that, how this has kind of embedded itself in our institutions since the 40s and 50s, to be honest. And I think it does go back that far. But you tend to have these peaks and troughs politically, don't you, where, Mrs. Thatcher came in and had to go at the unions and all the rest of it. Tony Blair kind of made a point, particularly towards the end of his premiership, of putting his own people into civil service roles and into those kind of jobs. We've never really undone it since 2010, to be honest. And I think there's a lot of work to do.
No, absolutely right. Let's just finish up with Boris Johnson. I don't know if you're going to be heading into the chamber today. You probably can't. You have to draw straws for that, I suppose, now. But Boris Johnson, 12:30, probably going to announce some kind of lockdown of one kind or another. A lot of people think he's getting this wrong. What's the view inside the party?
We'll try and get in. As you say, you have to kind of draw straws and hope you get on the list. But I'll certainly be there to watch it. And I'm hopeful that, certainly given the doom and gloom over the last few days, it's not going to be as tough as a lot of people had feared. I certainly don't want to see us as kind of locked down again in the same way as we were before. It seems like it's going to be kind of restrictions on pub times and a bit on socialising. I guess we can handle that to a certain extent. I don't think there's a huge appetite in the parliamentary party for kind of draconian measures. I keep hearing the words personal responsibility bandied around a lot recently, and I think that's important.
Yeah, and I think certainly Andrew Bridgen and others are going to be trying to push for more of a debate as well about the imposition of any further kind of measures and any further action, really, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, there's no right answer here, right? People have had such disparate experiences of COVID. Some people have been locked away for months. Other people have been carrying on as normal. There is no answer that's going to please everybody, but just from a kind of ideological point of view as a conservative, I just think we shouldn't be, controlling the minutiae of everybody's lives, and I think that's probably the prevailing view within the Conservative Party. Yes,
I think that's probably the prevailing view inside the country as well. Well, listen, Ben, good to see you. Thanks very much for sparing the time for us today. Ben Bradley, Conservative MP for Mansfield.